No one in Oakland County saw it coming. Not the parents, not the police, not the children who simply stepped outside and never came back home. In the winter shadows of Metro Detroit, between busy streets, quiet suburbs, and neighborhoods that felt safe, someone was hunting children. Not for money, not for ransom, but for reasons darker than anyone was prepared to even imagine. 4 kids, innocent, ordinary, just living life, vanished. Days later, their bodies were returned, cleaned, washed, almost cared for, and that's when Michigan realized something horrific. This wasn't random. This was organized. This was methodical. This was a killer who watched, waited, and picked his victims with terrifying precision. Welcome to the Oakland County Child Killer case. Detroit in the 1970s was a city caught between decay and denial. Factories were closing, jobs were disappearing, families were trying to survive in a world that felt like it was slipping away one paycheck at a time. The auto industry, the heartbeat of Detroit, was coughing, sputtering, and people were feeling the impact in their homes. Bills stacked up, neighborhoods hollowed out, police forces were stretched thinner than they had ever been. Crime didn't feel like a story you saw on the evening news. It felt like something that lived outside your front door. Parents were already nervous. Strangers didn't feel as harmless anymore. Kids were warned to be careful. But it still all seemed like something that happened to other towns, to other families. Detroit was a place where fear didn't hit you like a sudden shock. It worked slowly, patiently, like rust on steel. So when children started disappearing in Oakland County, this Detroit suburban pocket that was supposed to be quiet, safe, and insulated from the chaos, it wasn't just another crime. It was a rupture. Because this wasn't the inner city being dangerous. This was the suburbs, homes with lawns, families who felt protected, and suddenly, no one felt protected anymore. It began on February 15th, 1976. 12-year-old Mark Stebbins walked out of the American Legion Hall in Ferndale, Michigan, just a few blocks from home. He wasn't doing anything reckless. He wasn't out late. He wasn't breaking any rules. He was simply going to walk home. The same short route he had taken countless times before. But this time, Mark never arrived. When his mother realized he wasn't home, panic didn't kick in instantly. Because back then, in the 70s, parents still held on to the belief that he probably just got held up somewhere. Kids were independent. They rode bikes. They cut through parking lots. They walked alone. Hours passed, then a day, then another, and the missing posters went up. 4 days later, Mark's body was found, neatly laid in the snow behind a local office building in Southfield. There was no chaos in how he was left, no signs he'd been dumped in a panic. He was positioned, he was washed, he had been fed, and this one detail struck investigators like a cold blade to the spine. Someone had held this child alive for days, cared for his appearance, and then killed him. This wasn't a runaway. This wasn't a random street crime. This was something calculated, something planned. And in that moment, Detroit learned the terrifying truth. A predator was out there, and Mark Stebbins was only the beginning. 9 months later, December 22nd, 1976, another child vanished. 12-year-old Jill Robinson from Royal Oak had gotten into an argument with her mother. Nothing explosive, just one of those normal parent-child disagreements that every household has. She grabbed her bicycle and rode off. She was seen leaving. She was seen pedaling down the street. And that was the last time anyone ever saw Jill alive. For days, no one connected her case to Mark Stebbins, because that's how denial works. Communities don't want to believe patterns exist, not when the truth behind the pattern is too dark to face. Then, 4 days later, Jill's body was discovered on the side of Interstate 75 near Troy. Just like Mark, she was clean, her clothes were neat. There were no signs of chaos, no frantic disposal, no obvious panic from whoever did this. This wasn't a killer who rushed. This was a killer who prepared. The very same chilling detail whispered through police reports and newspaper headlines. She had been taken alive, held, and then placed on display. 2 children, 2 neat returns, 2 bodies set down like someone was making a point. But even then, authorities weren't ready to say the words out loud. Serial killer. Because admitting that meant admitting something much worse. This nightmare wasn't an accident. It was a process. And it was just beginning, January 2nd, 1977. 10-year-old Kristine Mihelich walked to a neighborhood corner store in Berkeley, Michigan to buy a magazine. A harmless little errand. Just a short walk along 12-mile road, a route she'd taken so many times it barely even registered as leaving the house. She never made it back. This time, the panic didn't take days to begin. This time, the county felt something was wrong. Parents were still telling themselves these cases were isolated, that Mark and Jill were tragic coincidences. That lightning doesn't strike the same community twice, but deep down, people could sense Detroit's suburbs weren't safe anymore. 19 days later, Kristine was found, laid out in the snow in Franklin Village, another suburb, another quiet street. Another child returned like a message, clean, fed, cared for. That word again, cared for, which made everything 1,000 times more horrifying. Because this wasn't just murder, this was captivity. Someone was keeping these children alive, for days, before ending their lives. And that's when Oakland County came to a realization it didn't want to say out loud. Someone out there was hunting kids, deliberately, selecting them, taking their time, and then calmly placing their bodies where they would be discovered. This wasn't coincidence anymore. This was a pattern. And the killer wasn't slowing down. They were getting bolder. March 16, 1977. 11-year-old Timothy King borrowed $1 from his sister and headed to the corner store in Birmingham, Michigan, just to buy candy. It was early evening, still light outside, nothing risky, nothing unusual. He told his family he'd be right back. He never returned. This time the fear wasn't whispered, it was screamed. The King family went on television begging for their son's safe return. Tim's mother pleaded directly to the camera, saying she just wanted to be able to make her son his favorite meal again, fried chicken. The entire county froze. Police launched the biggest search Oakland County had ever seen. Officers, volunteers, helicopters, neighborhoods locked down. People kept their children inside like it was a war zone. But it didn't matter. 6 days later, Timothy King's body was found in a ditch in Livonia, and that horrific, chilling detail repeated itself again. He had been washed, clean, cared for, and this time, the killer had fed him exactly what he loved. Fried chicken, the very food his mother publicly mentioned she hoped to give him when he came home. That detail changed everything. Police were forced to confront a truth they didn't want to face. The killer was watching them. The killer was following media coverage. The killer was listening. This wasn't just someone abducting children. This was someone studying the families, studying the news, feeding off the fear. And after Timothy King, Oakland County wasn't the same. Law enforcement finally said the words everyone already felt in their bones. This wasn't 4 separate tragedies. This was a serial child killer, operating in Detroit's suburbs, and nobody knew where he would strike next. There's one detail that separates this case from almost every other serial killer in American history. These children weren't found tossed into ditches like garbage. They weren't thrown away in panic. They weren't abandoned in remote woods where no one was meant to ever find them. They were positioned, placed, almost returned, like someone wanted the world to see their work. And that's where the pattern becomes cold beyond imagination. Each victim was washed, their clothes were clean, their fingernails trimmed, their bodies cared for, their hair neat, and the most sickening detail of all, they had been fed. Someone was feeding these kidnapped children. Someone was taking time with them, keeping them alive for days, not hours, before killing them. This wasn't rage. This wasn't impulse. This wasn't chaos. This was ritual. This was someone who wanted control. Someone who wanted to prepare his victims and then release them like a message to the entire region. I can take your children, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. It terrified investigators because it meant something deeply disturbing. The killer cared about the presentation. This wasn't an animal acting on instinct. This was a person with discipline, organization, restraint. Someone who wanted to erase the evidence, not destroy the child's image. When police realized that, they understood this wasn't a case driven by the moment. This was a method, a system, a signature. The Oakland County Child Killer wasn't just taking lives. He was sending a message through the children themselves. When investigators finally accepted that this was a serial murderer, the next step became unavoidable. Who could do this? And over the years, 3 names have haunted this case more than almost anyone else. John Hastings, a man who allegedly failed multiple polygraphs, but was never charged. He lived in the right area, he had the right access, and certain people close to him claimed he fit the timeline far too well. But the evidence was never firm enough, never sharp enough, and his name slipped into the fog of maybe. Then there was Sloan, a convicted pedophile. His car, a blue Gremlin, was believed to possibly be linked to fibers found on one of the victims. But once again, it was a case of almost close, but not a direct hit. He denied the murders, and police could never lock him to the scenes with the kind of proof a courtroom demands. And then the name that still chills people in Oakland County. Christopher Busch, son of a wealthy GM executive, arrested on child sexual abuse charges, lived in Bloomfield Hills and right in the center of the kill zone. He committed suicide, or so it was ruled. But here's where the contradictions eat at investigators. His death stopped the killings. His sketches, disturbing drawings of children, were found in his room. He had money. He had protection. He had lawyers. And rumor has always whispered that he had something else. Connections. Connections that could make cases disappear. Connections that could make police go quiet. The official line? No one has ever been charged. The unofficial belief? Someone in that circle, Hastings, Sloan, Busch, or someone close to them, knows more than they ever said. And to this day, the question doesn't feel like who could have done it. It feels like who was protected. As the months turned into years, something inside the families of these 4 children shifted. They stopped trusting the system. They stopped believing the official statements, the polite press conferences, the controlled language. Because behind closed doors, they kept hearing the same whispers. Evidence that mysteriously disappeared. Leads that were suddenly dropped. People in high places who didn't want certain names dragged into this. Parents began to publicly say what cops refused to say. This wasn't just a killer who escaped justice. This was a case where justice might have been blocked. Politics, power, money, the kind of forces that make files go missing, the kind of forces that make detectives change direction overnight. The kind of forces that make people shut their mouths, not because they want to, but because they're told to. Some of the parents believed the killer had protection, not protection from the streets but from boardrooms, from wealthy families, from influential hands that nobody dared to challenge. And the most heartbreaking part? These parents never stopped fighting. They aged, but their anger never softened. They kept filing requests. They kept pushing investigators. They kept demanding answers long after the rest of the world moved on. Because to them, this wasn't a cold case. This was the worst betrayal imaginable. Not only were their children taken, but the truth might have been buried too. Even decades later, the Oakland County Child Killer case refuses to fade from Michigan's memory. Every winter when the snow covers the streets of Detroit's suburbs, parents remember the children who vanished. Communities whisper about the fear that crept into neighborhoods long thought safe. And the chilling truth remains. Someone somewhere might have helped this killer slip through the cracks. Evidence that could have led to a conviction vanished. Witnesses who might have spoken went silent. And the names of the wealthy, powerful, and connected hover over this case like a shadow. Some say the killer was never caught because he had protection. Protection that kept law enforcement at bay. protection that let him move freely through Oakland County while terrorizing families. And that is why this story isn't just about the children who were lost. It's about the justice that never arrived. It's about a fear that lives on, and a darkness that still lingers in Michigan today. The Oakland County Child Killer vanished as mysteriously as he appeared. No one was ever charged. No one was ever brought to justice. But the memory of Mark, Jill, Kristine, and Timothy refuses to fade. Their names echo through the suburbs in the whispers of parents who still wonder, still fear, still hope. This case is a wound that never fully healed, a reminder that some evil can hide in plain sight, and that sometimes the hardest battles are not against strangers, but against a system that might have failed. And as we continue this series, we will dig deeper into America's most haunting unsolved cases, because these stories deserve to be told, and these voices refuse to be silenced. The truth is out there, and one day, someone will find it.